Joining us on the line right now, it's KT McFarland, our good friend, national security analyst. You see her over Fox News all the time. KT, how are you?
It's great, thank you.
All right, so yesterday, the Attorney General of these United States is making an appearance at the press club, and he's answering questions, and somebody throws out a question about how, the Justice Department has gone after reporters, and it's sort of an aside comment, but it's very telling. Here's what he had to say about that.
Well, use an extreme example, perhaps unfair. In World War II, if a reporter had found out about the existence of the Manhattan Project, is that something that should have been disclosed? No, we're not in a time of war, I understand.
We're not at a time of war. Did you hear that?
No, we're not in a time of war, I understand.
This seems to me, it was sort of an aside, but it seems to me this speaks volumes about where this administration's head is when it comes to the threat of ISIS.
Yeah, it's not their fight. They have either refused to recognize the existential threat of our time, which is Islamic extremism, or they have seen it, but they don't want to do anything about it because they don't think it's a problem, or they're in over their heads. And I think it's probably a little bit of all three. At this point, they're in over their heads. And the president and his top advisors, which is now an shrinking circle, have just decided, it's just not our fight. That's a Bush thing.
One can only imagine that if you approached a member of ISIS leadership and asked them, are you at war with the United States, they would have a very succinct and clear answer.
They would say yes, and we're winning.
Yeah.
Look, the existential threat of our time, in other words, the threat that's going to make a difference on all of our lives for the next generation, is the threat of radical Islam. It's not ISIS. It's a lot bigger than ISIS. It's not throw 1,000 troops here, let's debate about whether they should be boots on the ground. It's much bigger than that. It's a threat like Nazism was in World War II and like communism was in the Cold War. And the only way to defeat it is to have a comprehensive strategy, not just, it's going to be a military solution only. And so that's what you see a lot of conservatives have said. We're going to send in more boots on the ground. Look, we did that. We did 150,000 boots on the ground for nearly a decade, and that wasn't enough to stop the spread of radical Islam. It's now in more places in greater strength than ever before. The Obama administration stuck their hand in the sand. Well, that didn't work either. Now we see it's increasing at an exponential rate. So we got to take a step back and say, okay, what's the ideological part of this? What's the economic part of this? What's the military part of this? What's the diplomatic part of this? What's the alliance part of this? And have a comprehensive plan to defeat it. So, for example, where are they getting their money? It's expensive. ISIS needs a lot of money. Radical Islam has to be well-funded. Where is it coming from? It's coming from oil revenues. So bomb the oil fields in Iraq. Take out the tankers that are filled with ISIS oil going to market. Tell the Saudis, we're not going to protect you unless you rein in your wealthy donors who are contributing to Al-Qaeda. That's just one part of it. It's also got to have a part that says to somebody like President Sisi of Egypt, congratulations for you going to your clerics and saying, to the imams, you guys have to reform from within. But we didn't. We welcomed the Muslim Brotherhood, the enemies of them, to the White House.
Well, and when you say there's an economic angle to this, I understand what you mean in terms of working with the Saudis and going after where ISIS is getting their money and, bombing tankers and things like that. That's also a military solution. But, people at the State Department these days, in the personage of Marie Harf, spokesperson, she seems to think that it's more of a socioeconomic thing. I know you've heard this. Let me play it really quickly.
What makes these 17-year-old kids pick up an AK-47 instead of try to start a business?
Are these 17-year-old kids, as she put them, are they really contemplating, do I start a business? Well, I can't do that, so let's go pick up a gun and kill the infidel.
Well, look, if poverty was the sole cause of terrorism, India would be the biggest terrorist country in the world. And it's not.
Right.
Why? Because it maybe that's one ingredient of it. But the same way that, let's send 100,000 troops in, that's not a solution either. It's a part of a much bigger threat. And with all due respect to Ms. Haft, she's never been right on anything.
Well, what I found interesting about that is they apparently think that the solution to this problem is to give jobs to the terrorists, and we can't even create jobs in this country. I don't know. They've done a bang-up job here.
Well, I talked to General Garner, legendary General J. Garner, about this jobs thing, and he said, look, they've got jobs. they're very well-paid jobs. Their jobs are to be jihadists,
Yep.
Fighting for the cause that they may or may not believe in, but for which they're very well paid.
All right, so the United States apparently is going to allow the export of armed military drones to some of our allies. Do you have any concerns about this, or is this a good thing?
Well, I mean, which allies, under what circumstances, which drones? So I think the devil is in the details. If we're giving drones to people who are then going to use them potentially on our allies, I don't think it's a good thing. In the Middle East, the problem with the whole Islamic extremism thing and how to counter it, and in fact the problem with the whole Middle East in general, is it's all tribal. And sometimes the tribes are with you, sometimes they're on the other side. And they constantly shift around. And so the guy we arm, our friend who we arm today, could turn out to be our enemy in using those same weapons against us.
Right.
It was the whole problem with Afghanistan and arming the Taliban. Those are the same weapons that are now used against our guys. It's the same problem in Libya, where they armed who they thought were the good Libyan rebels. Well, those are the same weapons being used now against our allies in the region and potentially against us. So I think with foreign policy, you got to have a rule, which is first, do no harm.
Katie McFarland, a big talk around this town over the next couple of days will be the White House Summit on Violent Extremism. Is this destined to fail? Is there any kind of progress that can be made from this? Or the fact that they're even naming this summit after a euphemism for terrorism instead of actually addressing it by name, does that sort of tell you exactly where we're headed?
They've just decided it's not their fight. They're not going to get involved. And this tragedy of it all is that people have thought, well, we're going to, if they only will recognize there's a problem, they'll do something about it. They're not going to. We are going to spend the next 2 years not dealing with the rising threat of radical Islam. We're not going to deal with it in any way, shape, or form. And this administration is just checked out. So when it gets bad, there'll be more beheadings, there'll be more humiliations. What they'll do is another job summit. They'll throw a couple of thousand American military into the mix, and maybe that'll make a difference. But they really have refused to come up with a comprehensive plan. Barack Obama is the Neville Chamberlain of our times. You could never have convinced Neville Chamberlain that the Nazis were a threat, even as they were marching on other countries throughout Europe.
Yeah.
Neville Chamberlain, I guess maybe when they were bombing London, he got it. But Barack Obama is the Neville Chamberlain of our time.
All right, KT, we're going to leave it there. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon.